Thinking of building your dream home? Hi, this is Josh and Brian here with the Lenhart team at Coldwell Banker Realty. Today we're going to dive into some tips and tricks on how to navigate through new construction in today's market. We're going to talk things from land cost to design and builds, and some features and upgrades in a house. So
Yeah, most importantly, the mistakes we see people making every single day. So I think the most important thing for people to realize when it comes to them building their own home, the amount of times we get phone calls on a piece of vacant land, right? Think about some of the pieces of vacant land that we've had for sale in the past or
Yep.
we've seen for sale, and people will call in. And their biggest mistake that they make is they'll go in, they'll see this piece of land that's on 5 acres, and let's say it's $150,000. Well, they're just looking for the land without knowing what they're going to build.
right.
And I think that that's the biggest thing when somebody comes in to go, I want to build my own home. They don't quite understand what they're going to build,
What the process is.
what the process is, how much it's going to cost for them ultimately to land prep that land,
Yep.
and then what they want to build. So what I like to do is make sure to take a buyer to go backwards from it. Is to go, hey, what is this house going to look like when we're done? Do we know what it looks like? How many
Right.
bedrooms are we going to have? What style of house is this going to be? And then from there, we'll work back to make sure we hit the right price point.
Yep.
So I think when it comes to a piece of land, understand, and you can talk about this, is the cost it takes to prep a vacant piece of land. Let's say that let's say it is well and septic. Let's say it does have some trees to be cleared, it's not a super complicated piece of land, but what does that usually cost?
Right. You're going to have, one, it's clearing of the trees and getting a driveway in, putting the culvert in, your well septic. A well and septic just generally is right around, I would say, $35,000 to $50,000. So now you have a $150,000 piece of land. We just added a well and septic, so now we're already at 200, and a lot of people come in and it's like, well, I want to build that 400 or 450. We're going to be blowing that out of the water at a $150,000 piece of land. And then you have a driveway, and that excavating cost is probably going to be, in that $10,000 to $20,000 to get the driveway in, the site flattened out, so you can start putting the foundation in.
Yeah. And I think that that's what happens different than if you buy into a development. That development has already been prepped. It's already been understood what the packages are going to be for that development.
Right. What style of house could fit on that lot.
Exactly. So when it comes to a piece of vacant land, you might also have the cost when it comes to getting perk tests to make sure a septic can go in.
Yep.
To get soil tests to make sure the style of house does fit on. Maybe a survey needs to be done.
Yep.
But then also maybe it needs to bring infill to be able to have the right padding for it to work. So I think that those are some of the things that people run into when they go, hey, I bought this piece of land for $150,000. I want to build on it. I'm like, well, it's actually going to cost you another $50,000 or $75,000 to even get it ready before you even talk about adding in the material of the cost. So
Right.
I think that that's the important part. When you try to take somebody to understand what they are going to build. The best way to do it is to look at model homes of other builders. It doesn't need to be where you build those homes. You can always take that floor plan. An architect probably has something very similar to that, or the builder that you want to work with probably has something similar or can help you through that process. So I always like to start that with people is go, if we're looking at land, let's figure out what the build is going to cost, because we can't just buy a piece of land. And think about the mistake that people make all the time is buying a piece of land and saying, I'm going to build on it in a few years. And what happens 50% of the time?
50% of the time, they end up reselling the land because they can't afford what they thought they could on it because they didn't do the homework ahead of time. We had that case in point a couple times this year. We had a client that was under contract with a piece of land, and they were negotiating it, and then brought a question to us because they wanted us to list their house, and we're like, do you understand what this is going to cost? What you want? What I know what you're trying to buy, and what you're going to try to build isn't going to be in your budget. And we had a conversation, and all of a sudden they went and talked to a contractor and realized, you're right, this is going to be $200,000 over what we want. And they ended up, not that we're trying to talk them out of new construction, but just trying to educate them, and they ended up buying an existing house because what they wanted was going to be $200,000 over budget for them.
And I think that that's a really important part of buying a new home or building a new home is understanding, hey, what is this going to take? What is this going to cost? How long is this going to take?
Right.
Being with a good agent or with a good builder and having those conversations is really important because it's much more complicated than you think it would be.
Right. Not
There's
going out
so
there.
many there's so many moving variables in it that can change what's going to happen. The timelines can be completely different, and trying to guess it all on your own is just it's so difficult. And a lot of that information isn't actively online. A lot
No.
of builders don't have like, hey, this is exactly what this build costs, unless they have a spec home that's already built. You have to math out what that land costs, what that land prep was cost, what their fee is, and try to figure out, okay, this is what this house costs. And that's about as close as you can get to really figuring it out.
Right. Because a lot of contractors, a lot of it's fixed, but then some of it's estimates of what a well and a septic is because it depends on what the subcontractor is going to charge. What type of septic system do we have to have? How deep is this well going to be on this piece of land? So
yeah, there's some variables that they don't know.
Yep.
And what happens a lot of times is you'll go to a builder and they'll have their standard packages, right? So you'll maybe be able to see, and hopefully you can, to see their a previous home they've built and just kind of understand like, hey, is granite countertop standard?
Yep.
Is upgraded carpet a standard? What things are here that are standard? Because not all houses are built the same.
No, correct. Windows can be, you could spend 10 grand on windows, you could spend 200 grand on windows, depending in the same house, just how deep of, how nice of a window do you want to have in there? What is the builder's middle grade? What is their standard feature sheet that they have? So, and then all of a sudden, hey, I picked out this type of siding and, that siding's an upgrade versus what was a standard. So what are those costs?
And I think that once you have the land chosen, let's say you have it chosen, let's say you have it prepped, and now you're going to get an estimate from the builder, or you bought in development, right? You'll go based off of their standard features that they have. Know what those are, because that's what the base price they're quoting you on is at. Now from there, what will happen is you'll end up going to a design center, or you go to a selections meeting is what it's called.
Yep.
Now, during that selection meeting, I always make sure, because buyers spend way more than they think they will.
Yes.
Every single time, if you go and you buy a packaged home, or you're starting that base model price, and then you get to selections and you get to the electrical walkthrough and you get to these inflection points where you have choices, you will choose for extra things.
Correct.
Now, builders do a great job. A good builder will have a lot of great standard features, but you'll have a few things that you definitely want. There'll be places that you'll upgrade. You may add a couple of paint colors here. You may pick different cabinets. You may want an extra window here or a different style of door, and only some of them fit into the base prices. So understand that during those selection features, I don't know if I've met anybody that hasn't spent
over budget
more than they think they're going to
Yep.
during that price point. So
Right.
I think it's really important that when you select a build, you are leaving some room there to add some things in. Insulation in the garage, heating the garage,
Yep.
a gas stove versus an electric stove. There's a bunch of things in there.
running
that-
the extra gas line, or going to the lighting selection. A lot of times it's an estimate. Here's your estimate to use at your lighting selection. It's like, well, I want this big giant dining room light. Well, that's half of your lighting budget. So now what are you going to do? Or I want to go can lights versus regular lights, regular mount lights in a room. Those are all big changes.
That's why I think it's really important that if you're going to build your own house, that you do have a big enough budget for those things to happen. Because what I also hate seeing is when somebody buys a house and they can't do any of those things. And they end up, where it's the simplest and cheapest to actually put those upgrades in is when the contractors are in there.
Correct.
And they go, hey, I'll do that down the line.
Yeah.
I'll upgrade the carpet down the line. I was at a friend's house who actually has a fairly large new build, right? A really nice new build, and they have builder grade paint. Well, it's a 4,000 square foot house.
Yep.
And the paint is fine, but for them to repaint it, even though they bought it 4 or 5 years ago, that's going to cost them $15,000, $20,000. And they won't repaint it, because
it's
a
gonna cost.
giant, it's a giant cost. It's like, well, 4 years ago, if you would have chosen a better paint,
Yep.
Something that you wouldn't think of because it looks fine and it works and you can touch it up, all those things, or your carpet, where it's like the carpet looks great when we move in.
Right.
Well, now 4 years
Two,
down the
right.
road,
2, 3 years later, it's wearing through, where you have your pathways where you walk all day
because
long.
it's not the thing you want to upgrade at all, right? You want to upgrade, a bigger room or add a deck or those things that you can see that you forget the little things
Yep.
of like, man, I wish I would have added a light here. Well, adding a light there would have been $100 and we were already over our budget. So I think as much as you can to be able to have a little bit of a gap between that base model price and being able to add the things in you want, that's the time that I think it makes sense for somebody to build. And a lot of times I don't think it makes sense.
How can a buyer keep costs low during the build?
Yeah, I think that's the important thing is like a lot of people will reach out and they'll go, I think I can build it for this, right? And it'll be like, okay. The one that we hear all the time is, I have a friend that's a contractor. I have a friend that does plumbing. I have a friend that does electrical. I'll be able to keep these costs down from that. And to me, my first question is like, have you asked them if they'll do it?
Right.
And what will they charge? Do you know? Right?
Yep.
Because it's like, yeah, sure, you have a friend that can do some of these things, but are they willing to do an entire house?
Right.
Are they good at it?
Right.
Will the builder allow this to happen?
Can they do it on the builder's schedule to keep, because there's a complete systematic, subcontractors don't want to be stepping on each other through a process. So
yeah, and usually I don't think I've yet to see that work where that's allowed to happen, or like they'll think that they can do that and then it doesn't work like that.
Yep.
So I think that's one ways that I think that people think they can. The other thing that I think people think they can do is they'll see a barn dominium online.
Yep.
That's $125,000.
Yep.
That is really just materials. That has nothing to do with the labor and costs and permits and site prep and all of the other things that go
putting
into
it all
building,
together.
that they go, I'll do a barn dominium. And it's like, that isn't actually cheaper.
Correct.
They
equal out about the same.
They are relatively very close. That's a myth that I think I hear from a lot of people. The other myth that I hear a lot of times for somebody to keep the cost down is go, I'll build something really, really small. It's like, I want to build a tiny home.
Yep.
And it's like most counties don't allow that to happen.
Correct.
So I think that when it comes to actually keeping your costs down on a build, it's the land. Your best variable on it is the land. And the land that is had and already developed by, larger developers is typically the cheapest land, and they're really small lots. They buy a giant portion of land. They cut them all down into really small to be able to keep that cost really low, so that build cost can be really low.
The site prep is done. There's no, I don't want to say there's no thinking of what style house, is it a walkout? Or is it a lookout? Where does the house located? Because that's already pre-planned out with this design and build. They've already done that.
Yeah.
So you know what your cost is. It's generally a whole lot cheaper and easier to walk into something like that. You're not going to have the hidden cost of, oh, hey, this well now all of a sudden is more expensive, or the driveway is more expensive. No, it's already pre-figured out because of where the house placement is, because of how the land was set up.
Yeah, and it's pre-figured out to essentially reduce the cost of that land as much as possible. So I think that's the number one variable you have control on is the land. When it comes to the next one that you have control on to keep your costs down is the style of home.
Correct.
We've talked about this before, but a split level is the cheapest price per square foot to build because it uses the least amount of materials for the most amount of square footage.
Correct.
The second one is going to be a 2-story home.
Yep.
Those are going to be cheaper than, and the most expensive one is going to be your Rambler.
Yes.
So understand that building up is cheaper than building out, right? Wood is less than concrete, right? So knowing that can save you to go, hey, I really want a 1-story. It's like, well, we could do a 2-story, get the same square footage, and you can put a main floor bedroom. Knowing that that is a huge variable for being able to reduce costs is reducing the amount of material, the amount of roof lines that you have, the amount of windows that you have. The biggest thing that you have to control for variables is the material being used on the project.
Right.
So obviously a smaller house is going to be cheaper.
Yep.
That's the biggest thing. I think that a lot of people have this misconception that builders are really choosing the price. They don't just take it and go, I think I could sell it for this, I'm going to do that.
Yep.
What they do is they go, what is this going to cost to build? So I think that if anybody's ever gone out and went to a builder and go, hey, I want to know what this plan will cost to build. And it takes like 3 weeks to get the number, right? It takes a long time because they have to take and go, how much material do I have to buy? What does that cost right now?
Send it to the lumber yard. Send it to the plumber.
Yes.
Send it to the roofer. Send it to the concrete guy, the drywall guy. You know, how many sheets of drywall are we going to use? How much? And the builder has a pretty good idea as far as where outlets are going to be, what plumbing fixtures are going to be in there, but they got to get all of that cost of material, how much it is. Those are, I don't want to say quote unquote fixed costs. It's here's what the material is going to cost and what the subcontractor is going to charge, and this is what the price is.
And then they put their fee on top of that. It's not going, hey, what do you think we could sell this for? What should I tell this client? It's never been a conversation we've ever had with a builder. It just goes, here's what it's going to cost me to build it. Here's what I charge for that. And it's just a percentage. It's not a number. They don't make this number up. And then it goes, well, here we go. And that's where the number comes from. And a lot of people think that they go, well, I'll just use a different builder. And it's like, that different builder probably isn't cheaper on their fee that they charge. They're probably cheaper on maybe the subcontractors are cheaper. Maybe they don't charge as much. Probably because they're not as good. Or two, it's like they're using different materials.
Right.
And usually, I mean, that materials is you get what you pay for.
Correct.
Is really what it comes
Somebody's
down
cutting corners somewhere. If you're finding a general custom home builder, you're not going to find a giant difference in pricing between one from the other. Who do you feel most comfortable with? Now, you start working with national builders. Yes, their subcontractors may be a little bit cheaper, but they're only building this style of house in this neighborhood. They're not building custom.
The reason why they can keep those costs down is because they can buy bulk material. They get deals because of that. I think that's also the other thought when they go, well, I'm a contractor. I can do these things. It's like, well, you don't have the relationship with the electrician to get a good price for this stuff. They'll quote you higher than somebody else because they've never worked with you before, right? The lumber yard probably won't work with you because you've never worked in this area before, and I think that's where you have to be able to reduce those costs when it comes to a build. And it's not as many variables as you think it would be. And that's what happens.
Why do let's go national home builders. Why do their floor plans sell rapidly and,
why are they all so similar? Is that what
they're
you're
all
asking?
so similar? And then also you get a custom, you got the seller that says, I built this house custom with one bedroom on the main level and, all my other bedrooms are downstairs.
Well, I think that a lot of people running this today is like, oh, all these floor plans, all these neighborhoods look the same, and it's like, well, there's a reason for that. And the reason is, one, is because that's what everybody likes.
Right.
If you go into a 2024 build 2-story, right? You're like, well, this is really functional for my family.
Right. Yep.
It really is. Now take that same one and go find a custom, already previously built custom home that was built specifically for some person, right? And you're like, what is going on?
Right.
Why is there a main floor bedroom and 2 bedrooms up and 2 bedrooms down? Or why are all the bedrooms in the basement?
Yep.
Why is there's this giant room that's empty that is just a tunnel for an office space? It's like, this doesn't really make sense to anybody but the person that custom built that home.
Yep.
So I think that's the thing of like, people when they want to build something that's super custom. And now don't get me wrong, I love the ability where somebody can take a 2-story and make changes to make it their own and add a little bit to it. So it isn't so cookie cutter. I think there's upgrades and additions that you can do that do make sense. But I think sometimes people think that like, hey, they want the house that is super custom. It's like, you probably don't.
Right.
There's a reason.
Right.
This is what makes the most sense. And that's the same thing of like, if you look back to the 1950s and you see those Ramblers, they're all the same.
Correct.
They have tiny closets, tiny rooms, right? Now we have monstrous master bedrooms because that's what people want. We have monstrous closets because we have more clothes.
Yep.
And then you take the other ones where it goes, you have a bunch of those 1980s split levels, right? And they're all smaller rooms, smaller closet, that tiny little entryway there in the front that people now despise, right?
Yes.
And it was like back in that era, in that time, it was like that made the most sense and people liked it.
Most cost-effective way to build the home.
Yes. 30 years from now, people are going to hate 2-story homes for some reason.
Why did we build 4,000 square foot house?
Something else is going to change, but realize that that's what happens, you know? And And I think that right now, based off of, American lifestyles, right? It's like that 2-story is the most popular
Yep.
floor plan for families. And it works. It functions. You got a big basement. You got a large open kitchen, you
Yep.
know? You
Yep.
don't have that 1950s, like, what is that dining room that's always right off that?
And the formal dining room,
Like
with
the like the
formal
tiny,
living
like
room.
it should be a room or it shouldn't be, like they
Yep.
don't ever use it. Like, what is this?
Yep.
It's like a galley kitchen that nobody can fit in. It's like that worked for back in the day, you
Right.
know? And now times change, and now this is the style that works the most. So I think that understanding that, going to custom can be hard to sell. That's
Correct.
for sure.
Yep.
I have that with sellers all the time. They're like, "Oh, our house was custom built and there's nothing else like it." I'm like, "There's a reason." You know what else is custom built that nobody else has is dome homes. But how many buyers want a dome home?
Right.
Not a lot.
They're few and far.
Yeah. So I think that those are a few of the things to be able to keep your build costs down, and also to understand what build costs are and understand that process, which, to be honest with you, I mean, I think being an agent for 7 years now, it took me a few years to really understand how that process works. So I think it's really hard for a normal consumer to go, yeah, I'm going to build a house. This is how it goes. It's like, man, there's so many things you don't know because there's so many moving pieces that it's so hard to keep up with.
And you get it's the buyer that, hey, bought this land, and how many times they come back and say, we're going to buy a house. We got to sell our house or sell our land so we could buy this other house because, we bought this land thinking we were going to build, and realized it was a bigger challenge and more moving pieces or more expensive than they thought it was.
Yeah. And I think on that final note is like, why are building prices more now than they've ever been? And I think there's a couple of things. One is the obvious one, is material costs have gone up.
Skyrocketed.
They have skyrocketed. They've wavered out when the pandemic hit. They stopped the lumber mills. They slowed down things, and they started trying to build more. So costs just went up. There wasn't enough supply. And now that supply is even out, the prices have kind of really held. They
Yep.
went down a little bit. You have some in there, but realize that in America, we have this shortage of homes.
Right.
And the only way to get more homes is to build them.
Yep.
So demand is there for these materials, so it's holding that price. And the second thing is that labor costs have gone up.
Right.
There's not a ton of framers.
No.
There's not a ton of roofers. That is not, they are able to choose their prices, and their costs have gone up too, right?
Yes.
So those two things are really the big reason. It's not the fact that builders have a chokehold on the market and they're choosing these prices and they're getting really greedy and they're just
Jacking up their contractor fee. That none of that has changed. It's more
it's the underlying cost of what it costs to build.
Right.
And that's the thing, is like, is it here to stay? Well, it's starting to look like that.
yes,
for sure.
I don't see it changing.
Yeah, but know that it's in those material costs. As soon as materials start to go down, as soon as demand for building a house goes down, whenever that may be, which
Right.
doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon, that's for sure. That may be when new builds become a little bit cheaper for people.
Yes.
So thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this topic or this channel, please subscribe to hear more. And we have our free new construction home buyers guide to help all this information get to you. So thanks for listening.